This is the Springfield Unity Summit, and we're seeing it as a kickoff to some greater collaborative efforts on trying to eliminate hate and intolerance in our community, bring a lot of the folks that are doing great work in this community, trying to bring people together to just acquaint themselves with one another, focus in on those issues in our community. And so we're looking to do some great work over the coming years together. And so today is sort of a start of trying to bridge some divides in the community and get all the folks that are in the proverbial choir singing on the same note. The notion about intolerance and hate many times in our community is are individualized acts perpetrated by folks that have an impact on the overall community, and we just like to send the message to folks that would practice hate and intolerance that there's more against them than with them.
You guys are doing like a tabletop exercise?
That's coming in the afternoon, and that's where we're going to get down to sort of the brass tacks of what we can do as a community to improve how we respond to acts of hate and intolerance in the community, and how we can prepare ourselves to eliminate these things as well before they ever happen.
Who's going to be involved with that tabletop?
It was open to anyone in the community that wanted to participate, and so we're looking for input from folks. But it's not just today. We're commissioning a new website that's going to help us to continue this work going forward, and it's called onespringfield.com, and it'll be up within the coming weeks, and that will help us to share the information that's shared today with the broader community and get them involved with the ongoing work.
One of the questions being the media, what do you think the media's role is in a situation like what happened down in Florida with the Trayvon Martin case?
Well, we hope to help you all out with coming up with strategies and processes that will engage you all to help us send, shall we say, the right messages when we have an incident like this occur. Not just the negative aspect that occurred, but also what is the community doing to make the most positive outcome out of that situation as possible.
When you think in terms of bullying for a moment or two, I'm of an age where, I think all of us have probably experienced bullying in some form or another. But when I was in school, it certainly took place. But, it was more a physical type of thing than an intellectual type of thing. And with all the different media that is available to young people today, it really is something that is impacting young people. I can tell you that as a father of two daughters, I always said that, they were great from the point where they were from infant to about 12. And then usually at between 12 and 13, it sort of changed. And then every year it got worse and worse and worse. And then about the time they turned 23, they were great people. Again, so that, just dealing as a parent, one of the things I do realize is that as you deal particularly with young adolescents, they can have a tendency to be quite mean. And it's something that we really all need to be cognizant of, and to make sure that where someone is having a problem, that it is actually dealt with, because it can have a psychological effect on people on a long-term basis. So it is important that it is discussed, that people realize what the problems are, and that we attempt to do something about it. And I use the words attempt because it really is very, very difficult to be able to solve that type of a problem. We can make it better. We probably can't make it go away. I want to take the opportunity to thank each of you for coming together to participate in this Unity Summit. I just came from across the street, and we have what's referred to as the SDAT group that is in the city. So we really today have two very, very important things that are taking place, both of which can have a very long-term impact on our community. The SDAT is basically looking at the downtown. When we talk in terms of a Unity Summit, what we really have the opportunity to do is to build upon the good things that we have within our community. And Springfield really has an awful lot of good things that we could be very, very proud of. But one of the things that we can never stop doing is striving to do better and striving literally to be perfect. This is really a tremendous opportunity to bring the community together regardless of race, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, geography, no matter what part of Springfield you live in or what your socioeconomic status is. Earlier this year, my management team within city government, and a total of about 50-some members of city government, participated in the Crossroad training. That was a very intense 3 days of training and really getting people to think outside the box for many people that maybe had never thought about some of the things that were covered. When we were done, I believe that everyone who participated had a much better understanding of where we are as a society, how we've got to the point where we are as a society. I believe that everyone was much better equipped to improve our community for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they live or what their social economic status is. Understanding and sensitivity is something that everyone needs, particularly the management team of city government that is running city government and those people who are making hiring decisions. Today's Unity Summit is an opportunity for each of us to continue to recognize our differences and appreciate and celebrate those differences rather than to allow those differences to divide us as a community. And I've often said that one of the biggest problems that we have, and what I consider to be the biggest problem that we have within our community, is a racial divide. Because there exists within this community a racial divide. And one of the things we really need if we're going to move this community forward and be the type of community that we want to be is we really have to correct that situation. I want to take the opportunity to thank our host organizations who have helped make this possible, our Community Relations Commission and the Coalition to Promote Human Dignity and Diversity. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the sponsors of this event, which includes the United Way of Central Illinois, the Springfield Project, the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce, and Hope and Action in Springfield. I also want to give a special thank you to Jerry Lambert, who is our MC today. My thank you is not only for being our MC today, but for his 17 years of involvement in our community and for literally coming into our homes on a daily basis in the evening to deliver the evening news. And Jerry, we're going to miss you, but we know that you're going to have a great retirement and be back down where the weather's a little warmer than what it is here during the winter, but you can always come back and visit God's country anytime you want to really enjoy life. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Marty Castro is the president and CEO of Castro Synergies, LLC, which provides strategic counseling services to corporations, entrepreneurs, and not-for-profit organizations that seek to collaborate with and have a positive social impact on diverse communities. In January of 2011, he was appointed by President Obama to U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. In the fall of 2011, the United States Commission on Civil Rights announced the release of its report, Peer-to-Peer Violence and Bullying, Examining the Federal Response. The purpose of the report is to examine the role of the U.S. Department of Education and Justice in addressing peer-to-peer discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. In December 2009, Mr. Castro was appointed by Illinois Governor Pat Quinn to chair the Illinois Human Rights Commission, the state public body that arbitrates complaints of civil rights violations in housing, employment, public accommodations, and financial credit. Mr. Castro received his BA in political science in 1985 from DePaul University and his Juris doctorate degree from the University of Michigan Law School in 1988. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I also want to extend my thanks to all the individuals and organizations that made today possible. I want to give Sandy Robinson a special thank you for all of his efforts and the efforts of his team to make today an opportunity for all of us to come together and commune and collaborate and talk about what we can do to address many of the challenges that our communities face, especially the issue of bullying. As the mayor indicated, I wear a number of hats. I'm a lawyer, private entrepreneur, but I also have the very distinct privilege and honor to hold two important government appointments. One here at the state level as chairman of the Illinois Human Rights Commission, to which Governor Quinn appointed me again to a full 4-year term just a few weeks ago. And then last year, as the mayor said, President Obama appointed me chairman of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, making me the first Latino chairman in the half-century history of the commission. And when I, thank you. And I will talk about each of those entities in a minute. I'll try to make clear when I speak on behalf of one entity or the other. If I don't make a distinction, that's because I'm telling you what my personal view is. But I think it's important to, especially to the young people, to let them know where I come from. Because these titles, which to me are great honors and humbling, don't tell the full story of how I got here and the challenges that I had to overcome to get here. My grandparents on my dad's side came to the United States from Mexico in the 1920s, looking for economic opportunity, fleeing the Mexican Revolution at the time that was toward its end. And they came here because they knew that if they made it to this country, that their children and maybe one day their grandchildren would have better opportunities than they did. They had no formal education, they had no real resources, but they had an abiding hope that this country and the American dream could make their lives better. The very same reasons that my mom came to the United States from Mexico in the 1960s. So I am the first one in my family to get a formal education. My mom didn't finish high school, neither did my dad. I'm the product of Head Start. I'm the product of affirmative action programs in higher education. I come from a working class family that had to work very hard to make sure that my brothers and sisters and I got an education. But you know what? I had to clean toilets, dig ditches, work in a factory, work as a gopher, all to do those things to pay for school. And despite the fact that I really worked hard and was an A student, my high school guidance counselor told me that I shouldn't go to college. And so I took my little applications, and my parents, they couldn't help me. They never went to college. They didn't know how to fill out an application form or a financial aid form. So through leaps of faith, luckily, I made it to become a lawyer. I got my undergrad at DePaul, studied political science, became a lawyer after I graduated from the University of Michigan. And even when I was thinking about the law schools, those are expensive places. And I remember several law schools had accepted me, luckily, and I was looking at the various schools. There was one school that was offering me free room and board, all my tuition paid, all my books and everything completely paid, plus $10,000 a year spending money. So after 3 years of law school, I'd come out with $30,000 in my pocket. And to an economically challenged family, that's a lot. And this is back in the 80s, so that was worth even more back then. And then there was the University of Michigan Law School, which was the #1 law school in the country at the time. It's ranking between #1 and #3. And they said, here's your small grant package, but here's your loans, somewhere in the vicinity of $60,000. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I don't have money. My family doesn't have money. Where am I going to get this? But I took another leap of faith, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to get into the best law school that I can get into, and I'll get my loans, and I'll figure out how to pay for it later, because that's an investment in myself. And I did it, and I ended up getting a job at the world's largest law firm, Baker McKenzie. And this from a family of immigrants who had nothing, to be able to just make those leaps of faith. So as you're thinking about the challenges you face, whether it's, we'll talk a little bit about bullying in a second, but the challenges economically that you face, or the lack of social capital that many of our communities, underserved communities have, I want you to remember that someone just like you, who comes from a very similar background as you, made it here today to be a presidential and a gubernatorial appointee despite all the challenges that we face, because you can never let those challenges knock you down. And if they do, you have to get back up, because you can do it. There are people here in this community, as you can see, and people at home and in your school and in your family that will help you. And it is those same people that will help you when you have the challenge before you of being bullied or being picked on, as was referenced earlier. That's what it used to be called. But we see that the ramifications of that have a tremendously negative impact. At the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, we, as Mr. Mayor said, Mayor Houston said, we did a study last year and submitted it to the President and Congress, because the role of the commission at the federal level, there's 8 commissioners, 4 of us are presidential appointees, 4 are appointed by Congress, and we're bipartisan and independent. So we will have a mandate to look at federal agencies, regardless of the administration, and determine whether or not they're meeting their obligations to protect our communities in their civil rights. And so we decided, as the first report to Congress and the President under my chairmanship, that we would look at bullying. Now, unfortunately, many bullies are equal opportunity bullies. They bully anybody for anything, and that's unfortunate. But when those bullies bully someone based on race, national origin, gender, disability status, or religion, and in some cases LGBT status, they are violating the civil rights laws. And that's where our interest as the United States Commission on Civil Rights comes in. So what we did is we looked closely at what the Department of Justice at the federal level and the Department of Education were doing to address issues of bullying across the country, because we have states that have their own laws. At the time we did our report, there were 44. Now there are 49 states in this country that have their own bullying laws that require varying levels of protection for students. But the federal government has to play an important role. So we brought in experts from all over the country, from all sides of the political aisle, from different ideologies. We brought in parents. We brought in organizations such as yours. We brought in school districts to hear from them about what the opportunities were to address bullying and what the challenges were. And as you might imagine, given that we're a bipartisan committee, we have different points of view. One of the issues that was raised by my conservative colleagues was the issue of First Amendment. Some students may have they say, right to speak certain things to others. And so we asked the Department of Education, what about the First Amendment protections? And in fact, they said to us most of the cases that they see don't involve protected speech. But in my personal view, I don't think there's a constitutional right to be a bully. And when you look at the laws that exist, and we did that very closely at the Civil Rights Commission, we prepared for the President and Congress what we call our findings and recommendations. And after we looked at this issue, we saw that there are gaps in the federal civil rights laws when it comes to protecting certain students from certain kinds of bullying and peer-to-peer violence. So for example, if you are a student who's being bullied simply because of your sexual orientation, the federal civil rights laws, and I'm not talking about state laws or hate crimes, but federal civil rights laws do not provide our students with a protection. The way the Department of Justice and the Department of Education take a look at that is they view certain aspects of LGBT bullying as gender discrimination. So if a student is being bullied because they don't fit a gender stereotype, that is, oh, you don't act like a girl should, or you're not dressed like a boy should, well, then they consider that gender discrimination. They look at it under the gender discrimination laws that we find on the federal level. However, if you're being bullied just because of your orientation, there's that gap. And many of our students, unfortunately, fall into that gap. Secondly, we found that if you're being bullied solely because of your religion, there is a gap in the federal law again. The way the federal government's departments look at it is a mixture of national origin discrimination and religion. So, for example, if you're being picked on because you're an Eastern European Jew, then it becomes national origin discrimination that the Department of Ed and the Department of Justice will look at. But if you're being bullied just because you're Catholic or just because you're Mormon, you fall into that gap. So part of the findings and findings we made to the Congress and the President is that there are these gaps. But we also said in response to the question raised by our conservative colleagues that the Department of Education and the Department of Justice should clarify when it's a First Amendment issue and when it doesn't exist. But most importantly, what the Commission did, I think, is the fact that we looked at bullying, especially of LGBT students, but of all students who are protected, and said that the Commission itself whose historic mandate dates back, as I said, a half century, who was involved in the creation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that the United States Commission on Civil Rights has found that bullying and peer-to-peer harassment is injurious and harmful to children in this country. And that message is something that we have been trying to promote, that I have personally been trying to promote as chairman. Because as I mentioned earlier, states have their own laws. But we also found through the course of our investigation that not every state enforces its law equally. It varies from school district to school district, and even within schools, the application of that policy. Here in Illinois, we are looking at right now a bill, HB 5290, and in my capacity as chairman of the Illinois Human Rights Commission, and we have Bobby Wanzo here from the Department of Human Rights. Our organizations are part of a coalition in support of that law because it allows the existing bullying law here in Illinois to be made more specific. Right now we require a bullying policy in schools, but we don't tell the school districts what they should put in those bullying policies. And we don't have to be specific, but there should be certain elements in there. There should be training. There should be restorative justice. There should be elements to help that student who's also a bully. And many school districts don't have that guidance. So we're hoping that that piece of legislation, which I think is being taken up this week, makes it to the governor's desk. And if you all are supportive of this issue, then that's something you might want to express to your legislators. Also, at the federal level, there are federal laws that have been proposed over the years to fill those gaps that I talked about earlier in the protection of our LGBT and students who are being bullied on the basis of religion. And so it's important for those of us who are activists in this issue, who have experienced it, whether as a parent or an individual, that we should make our views known and clear so that at one time, hopefully in the not too distant future, those laws are changed and adapted to fill those gaps. But when I looked at this issue initially last year, it was something that was important to me because any one of us has children in our lives, whether it's our own children, grandchildren, whether it's a neighbor or niece or nephew. And so we want to make sure that those children are safe. But it really hit home for me right after I issued this report. And by the way, this is a copy of the report, which you can get either by going online at the Civil Rights Commission's website, usccr.gov, or you can call our office at 202-376-7700, and we'll actually mail you a free copy of this. I didn't want to bring too many of these because they're heavy. But these are reports that are public records that are paid for by your tax dollars. And there's a lot of great information in here from organizations across the country, as well as different perspectives from myself and my other colleagues. But as I said, once we issued this report, it became very real for me. The issue hit home because my son, who had just started middle school, 5th grade, was bullied at his school. And we live up in River Forest in Chicago, the Chicago suburbs. And he was playing on the school ground one day, probably a couple weeks into school, maybe a month into school. New school for him, so he's adapting. And some upper class students, turns out one of them was a 7th grader, came up to him and his friends and began to harass them, asking my son whether or not he was a legal or an illegal immigrant. And when my son didn't know how to respond because he wasn't sure what he was being asked, the kids again, well, we want to know, are you legal or illegal? My son said, I don't have to answer your questions. They said, no, we want to know, what's your origin? Where are you from? And so at that point, my son said, I don't need to answer your questions, and he started to walk away. But they blocked him, and they said, no, we're the Border Patrol. We want you to put your arms up against the wall. We're going to frisk you. And again, this is his couple weeks in there. We've always taught our children, violence is not the answer. Don't resort to it. However, you have a right to defend yourself if someone's going to physically do something to you. So he said, I have a right to defend myself, and if you grab me, I will. And luckily, he's built more like his dad than his mom, and so those kids went and they left him alone. They said, never mind. But then they went and picked on some other kids on the school ground. And that night when my son came home from school and told us what happened, he was devastated. He felt that he had been violated. He felt that there was a great amount of fear in him that these students were going to come after him again. He felt that there was going to be retribution if he reported them. And right off the bat, I saw exactly the type of issues that some of the parents and advocates in this report had told me about. And luckily, I had already just done a study on this, so the next morning, my wife and I were in the principal's office. And needless to say, the principal took action. Himself, he conducted the investigation and identified one of the two students and took action and suspended that student, brought the parents of that student in. And interestingly enough, I think some children do what they see at home and they say what they hear at home. If my son had done something like that, we would have certainly called the parents up and apologized. We never heard. And so when you think about the issue of bullying, it's not just the student, it's the family as well that we need to talk about. And in my instance, we were able to work with my son. He had some challenges after that emotionally, but we've worked with him and he's doing fine now. But that was from one incident. And luckily he had a mom and dad who could come in, who know the law, who know the way the system works. But what about those other children on the school ground that were being picked on that day? None of them came forward. Why? I don't know. Could be for a number of reasons. Or what about other children who are being picked on and bullied and harassed, who don't come forward because of fear, because of lack of knowledge, because of cultural or language barriers, or because their parents don't know how the system works, or because schools may not equally apply some of the anti-bullying laws. And we've even heard from some folks today about students complaining. And Tiara was an excellent example, and I commend her for coming forward because it's hard. But to say that when she first raised some things to her teachers, nobody did anything. So we have to remember that it is all our responsibility, each and every one of us, to do something. Because it reminds me of a Native American proverb that says, in all things and with all things, we are relatives. So this is about all of us, whether that child is our child or a neighbor or a student or someone we just happen to see. We have an obligation to stand up. But we also, those of us who are involved in public policy, have an obligation to ensure that other policymakers know when there is a lack of protection and that protection is afforded for our children. Because all too much lately we have seen children whose lives are being taken. And that is an extreme. We should not, in this great country, have a situation where children are being bullied for any reason whatsoever and having to lose their lives, but especially being bullied for reasons based on their race, their origin, their religion, their disability status, their gender, or their gender identity. And those are the things that we at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights have reported on, and we at the Illinois Human Rights Commission work to ensure that we have communities that are safe. Because you know what? These students who are the bullies, we have to remember that they also need our help. They also need interventions. And that's why 5290, the House bill, is important, because it addresses the restorative justice aspects of those students. Because if we don't help them as well, they will turn out to be domestic abusers. They will turn out to be the kinds of discriminators and people that we see at the Human Rights Commission. They probably started out, workplace bullies probably started out as school ground bullies. And domestic abusers probably started out as schoolyard bullies. So this is all interrelated. And we need to start early in that pipeline to make both our state and our country and our communities like Springfield safe for all of our children and all of our communities. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to come here this morning and this afternoon now, share some words with you about the work that we're doing at the federal and state level. And I want to just pledge to you my personal pledge that in whatever capacity I'm in, I look forward to working with each and every one of you, especially the folks we were meeting with this morning at the forum, on how we could continue to collaborate to make, as Governor Quinn often says, Illinois a state that is free of bias so that everyone here has their rights enforced. Thank you.